And we're live there. And I'm gonna go ahead and open up the room now. We are live. All right, welcome. We see you filling up the room. Always good to get a confirmation from someone in the audience that they can see our screen and hear my voice. Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you, thank you. Also, if you know what native land you're joining us from, you could put that in the chat box while we wait for the room to fill up. And if you don't know, you can, whoops, what's going on here? There we go. Use this. Why can't I get in the chat box? Am I there? No. That's weird. Hello. There's a great site called Native Land, and it's an interactive map. You can check that and see what native land you're joining us from. I'm hoping I'll be able to access the chat. That got weird, but we'll figure it out. All right, I'm gonna get started here right at the top of the hour. And I will be using the chat box, I really hope. I don't know why it's not. Oh, I think I got something here. So strange. I'm hoping it just has something to do with my my screen sharing, so it will stop after I'm done screen sharing. Yes, Aloni Kashia Kingdom. That sounds beautiful. All right, we're gonna get started here in just a moment. Welcome YouTube viewers as well. There is gonna be time for Q&A. Please use that Q&A function on your Zoom. And we have a very lovely guest helping us with the Q&A today. Will references be available? Does that mean questions? There will be time for Q&A. Susan will provide some great references. And once I am out of share, I'll put some links that will be very beneficial. Susan gives us a giant database list of amazing books and resources, so I will share those out. All right, let's jump in. Thank you so much for being here today. And this is Drought Tolerant Gardening with San Francisco Native Plants, and joined by the California Native Plant Society, our Yerba Buena chapter. So thank you for coming. We have our typical weather today here in San Francisco, which I love. Little foggy, little sunny. The San Francisco Public Library acknowledges that we occupy the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We recognize that the Ramaytush Ohlone understand the interconnectedness of all things and have maintained harmony with nature for millennia. We honor the Ramaytush Ohlone people for their enduring commitment to Warep, Mother Earth. As the indigenous protectors of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibility as caretakers of this place, as well as for all the people who reside in their traditional territory. We recognize that we benefit from living and working on their territorial homeland, and as universal guests, we affirm their sovereign rights as first persons and wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community. We recognize to respectfully honor Ramaytush people, we must embrace and collaborate meaningfully to record indigenous knowledge and how we care for San Francisco and all its people. And our library does this by providing lots of resources, reading lists. We love a reading list, so I will put that in the chat box. And then we have events really geared towards indigenous focus. So if you ever want to see anything or you have any ideas for programs, just let me know, and my email will be in the chat links. Now I just want to give you some updates on what's happening at the library. We have an amazing lineup of humans, amazing humans, authors, writers, poets, artists. We had our first live event on Thursday in person and Zoom. We did a hybrid. So that is now beginning to happen too. September 29th, we have San Francisco's oldest running journal. I don't know if it's its oldest running journal. It's been going since the 80s. Issue number 121. Ziziva, readers from Ziziva, issue number 121. We partner with Moab this week for Wole Soyinka, amazing Nobel poet laureate and artist and activist and author. And then that evening, we have author Brian Comey Dempster, who will talk about his new book of poetry about raising his son with disabilities. We went through a tech check with him, and it's going to be a very emotionally and powerful and still joyful event. So come check that out. Tomorrow we are celebrating Viva. That is Latinx Heritage Month for us. Tomorrow we have Jaime Cortez in conversation with Yosimar Reyes discussing Jaime's new book, Gordo. Definitely check out that book. And then on Tuesday, super excited to have Carolina de Robertis and Julian Delgado La Opera discussing Carolina's new book, The President and the Frog. And this is a partnership with San Mateo County Public Library System and Berkeley Public. And now I'm going to breeze through. We have a ton of events, like I said. Starting in October, we are going to be celebrating Filipino American History Month. We have cooking, we have authors, poets, flower demonstration from a local business here in San Francisco. And then some on the same page is our bi-monthly read, where we encourage all of San Francisco to read the same book. And we are celebrating the work of Carla Cornejo Villavicencio, The Undocumented Americans. And nature boosts and more book clubs with Total SF, the Chronicles team, Heather Knight and Peter Hartlaub in November in the Correct Auditorium. Join us in the Correct, come on down. November 17th, Bonnie Swee's Why We Swim, talking about swimming in our beautiful ocean and bay. All right, we did it. We got through library news. And now I would love to introduce Susan Karasoff, who is a member of the California Native Plant Society, Yerba Buena Chapter. And Susan has an only the easiest plants survive approach to gardening. She grows a buffet of colorful native edible and pollinator plants, specifically gardening to feed caterpillars, bees, hummingbirds, and people. So everybody, please welcome Susan. All right.
Hi, I'm Susan Karasoff from the California Native Plant Society. The San Francisco chapter is named Yerba Buena, and we're going to talk about drought-tolerant San Francisco native plants. We've got librarian Anissa Malati monitoring the YouTube chat, and we've got Mary Beth James Thibodeau, also from California Native Plant Society, monitoring the Zoom question and answer, the Q&A. So please put your questions in the Q&A. It's easier for us to scroll back and forth on Q&A than it is on chat. So please use the Q&A. This is going to have a lot of information, and you will be able to review it on YouTube because there's just a lot of information here. We're going to talk about why plant native plants, how to garden with native plants. Then we'll talk about the details of my favorite drought-tolerant native plants and gardens. And we'll look at what it's like to have a year-round buffet for people and wildlife in your garden and some native garden resources. So why plant native plants? Well, we have some serious insect decline going on because insects co-evolved with native plants. And when we don't have those plants in our landscape, then we also don't have the insects. All of our caterpillars learned to eat just one or a few native plants. Adult butterflies can eat all kinds of nectar from all kinds of plants, but caterpillars need to eat the leaves of the native plants that they co-evolved with. And we have got specialist bees that also need pollen for their baby bees from our native plants. When we don't have insects, turns out we also don't have birds. And so we need to have those insects in our landscape so that we have all of the insects and wildlife that we love to have that keep our ecosystem functioning. So we used to think that if we just stuck all of our local wildlife in a park, that would be fine. But it turns out that there are a couple of completely different studies by completely different researchers. Some German researchers who did studies in a set of German nature preserves, and a researcher who did research in a Puerto Rican nature preserve, and they are seeing the same trends for insects, which is a deep decline. Less than 4% of the land in the United States are national parks, state parks, and protected areas. So we cannot depend on parks to save our ecosystems and keep our wildlife alive. It's up to us. We've got the San Francisco Estuary Institute, and they did a study on how urban areas can support wildlife. And it turns out we can do this. And the urban biodiversity success factors that they came up with were native plants, so that we can feed those insects that feed everybody else, and green corridors for stepping stones, so wildlife can move back and forth. So if what you've got are some pots on a north-facing balcony, you can still feed your ecosystem. And the quality of the green space. So no invasive plants, reducing introduced non-native plants, reducing our lawns, and not using pesticides. And the green patch size makes a difference, because that pot you've got on your balcony is going to make a difference, but for some of our wildlife, they just need a bigger space. California quail are in coveys of 50 birds at least. They are a ground nesting bird. They're our state bird, and they used to be native here in San Francisco, and they aren't anymore because we just didn't have the space for them. Plus there's predators. We're going to try to reintroduce them in both the Presidio and Golden Gate Park, because those are the spaces big enough to hold coveys of quail. Recent information from the San Francisco Estuary Institute on a completely different project called Hidden Nature, which is so fun, so wonderful. You've got to see that. They've got maps of San Francisco, what it used to look like, and where all of our different plants are from. And that very scary chart is how many of our birds and mammals and amphibians and reptiles we've lost. The red is the lost and the green is the total. 68% of San Francisco is paved, and less than 4% of plants in San Francisco are native. So every plant we choose to plant is an opportunity to feed our ecosystem. Doug Talmy is a wonderful researcher. He is he studies insects at the University of Delaware. And about 20 years ago, he started looking into which plants actually which plant leaves support the most caterpillars. And he was shocked to discover that different plants feed different species of caterpillars and different numbers of caterpillar species. His information was so groundbreaking in the Delaware area that the U.S. Forest Service paid him to replicate that work, to at least find all of the published work for every county in the United States. So that information is now available at the county level at the National Wildlife Federation database. So we can see how many caterpillar species any particular kind of plant will support for San Francisco. And oh, by the way, the National Wildlife Federation database, that is both our native plants and introduced plants. And you may be shocked and horrified to see how few caterpillar species are fed by introduced plants. So that camellia the house we have has 2 camellias. Those leaves feed no caterpillars here. Just none. Ginkgos feed none. Introduced plant leaves feed between 0 and 2 insects. They're not helping our ecosystem. As opposed to the native plants, where if we have willows, it's over 300. If we have the coast live oak, it's almost 300. Our cherry feeds almost 300. We've got wonderful flowering currants and California lilacs and maples. Those local plants feed a lot of caterpillars with their leaves. And when we have caterpillars, when we have more birds. So we need to have those caterpillars in our landscape so that we can get butterflies and we can get birds. Native plants evolved in San Francisco's varied soils and weather. If you look at that chart, we just have so many different kinds of soil types just in 7 miles by 7 miles. We've got sand, we've got clay, we have 3 kinds of different rock. So it turns out it's important to know what kind of soil you have so that you can choose plants that will be adapted to your soil and weather. I'm in the northeast part of the city in North Beach, and it is just very different weather than my friends who live over in the Sunset and the Richmond, who have sand and fog and wind. I've got sunny clay, they have sand and fog and wind. I've got friends who are on serpentine rock. It is amazing. So not only do we have all those different soils, we've got 3 north-south fog and wind banks. And San Francisco, like all of California actually, has very, very different weather from month to month. We have a rainy season, which is the winter. And not only do we have rain that's different from month to month, but from year to year, that rainfall varies enormously. Our average is 20 inches of rain, but our rainfall ranges from 7 inches to 50 inches. We get 50 inches when we have atmospheric rivers. Those are the incredible, wonderful rivers of rain that come over the Pacific and dump a lot of water here and elsewhere in California. Los Angeles depends on atmospheric rivers. We depend on atmospheric rivers. The flooding that was in Napa and Sonoma, those were due to atmospheric rivers. We've had those in San Francisco before. California gets over half our rainfall from atmospheric rivers. So the important thing here, if you are thinking, oh, climate change, it's going to be hot, I should plant something from Los Angeles, please don't. Please plant something from San Francisco that has a range all the way down to Los Angeles, so that when we have terrible rain years like we did last year when we had 8 inches of rain, those plants will survive and will thrive. But they will also survive the years where we have atmospheric rivers. I moved here from Los Angeles. I grew some of my favorite plants in Los Angeles, and they all looked at the years where we had atmospheric rivers and keeled right over. They don't like that level of rain. So we need to have plants that will survive both our very dry years and our very wet years. And plants evolved in plant communities. Just talked about San Francisco Estuary Institute's Hidden Nature Project. That is an interactive map. It is just fantastic. I love it. I'm learning a ton from it. And they just rolled this out earlier this week. And for those of you who are listening, we're in September of 2021. So you may be listening later on YouTube. But this is a wonderful map if you haven't had a chance to go to the Estuary Institute and play with it. It's a lot of fun. Plants evolved in plant communities. And so in nature, when a seed is produced and falls on the ground, there's some shade, there's some water. There are older plants that have deep root systems or wide root systems, depending on the plant, that can help nurture those baby plants along when the rains come. And our plant communities are as varied as oak woodlands, coastal dune scrub, dunes, grasslands, riparian, which is a fancy word for creekside. Plant communities help baby plants survive in nature. And so, Anissa, is my video not on? Oh, all right. Oh, I see, my video, okay. Sorry, so riparian areas are damp areas. We actually have a bunch of damp areas. So the plants that evolved in the damp areas, not what we're going to be talking about today. We're only going to talk about the plants that evolved in the dry areas. And plant communities are the base of our local food web. Those plants help each other survive and then feed all of the other creatures in the ecosystem. So what is drought tolerant? So California summers are dry every year. If you have gardened on the East Coast, Northeast or something, our climate looks very, very different. If you are a new gardener, please, 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 please do not plant in the summer. I can't plant in the summer. I'm an experienced gardener, a terrible gardener, but an experienced gardener. I don't plant in the summer. I don't plant when it's dry. I only plant when it's wet. And our native plants evolved to survive those dry periods, but because they evolved in plant communities, they evolved with plants that have deep root systems and wide root systems to help share water and nutrients. Not all plants, even drought tolerant plants, are going to be drought tolerant in your garden, because if we don't have those roots and fungus systems to share water and nutrients with nearby native plants, it's just kind of all on its own, and that's just not how our plants evolved. Take a look. That's the Oakland Museum, has got that wonderful California oatgrass, and you can see how deep those roots are. In urban areas, we're often missing existing, and suburban areas, or we're missing the existing native plants. And so those new baby plants don't benefit from that root sharing until there are native plants with large root systems to help them along. Another thing that happens is that in dry years, native plants will just have many fewer flowers. They've got a choice about where to put their resources. Think like a plant here. I can work on growing my root systems so that I can collect more rain, so that I can live through the dry summer, or I could spend it on flowers and seeds, and they don't do very much. In a dry year, you'll just get a few flowers. I look at my garden in a dry year and I just think, oh, my plants are rolling their eyes. Really, seriously, it's so dry, you expect me to flower? I'm not going to do that, just a few. And then there's specific adaptations to drought. Some of our native plants have thick, fuzzy leaves, which is actually lots of fun to pet. Some of them have pale colored leaves, that pale gold color on that grass, or pale colored gray leaves. This way, they don't absorb as much sun, so they don't get as warm, so they don't evaporate or transpirate. When plants breathe, it's called transpiration. And sometimes they go dormant in the summer where their root systems are fine. And you may be used to winter dormant plants. Our maples, for instance, are just like East Coast maples in that they get color in their leaves and then they drop them in the winter. But in the summer, we have some California native plants that are what's called deciduous, where you just drop your leaves. The leaves curl up, they die, but the plant is fine. It will start putting out new leaves as soon as the rains come. So which native plants are not drought tolerant? We talked about the creekside plants. We've got creekside plants, lake plants, marsh plants, we've got fens. So these are all areas that are either damp year round or they're damp for 9 months. Not what a drought tolerant plant would be. We've got a lot of shade-friendly plants, and I did a presentation for the library about shade-friendly native plants. A lot of those are not drought tolerant. So if you think about when you're out walking and you're perspiring and you want to get a little shade because you want to be cooler, you get underneath a tree. Same thing with all those plants that evolved underneath trees. They can handle a lot of shade, which is the good news, and we have a lot of shade-friendly plants, but not all of those shade-friendly plants are really drought tolerant because they're used to being shaded and they're used to not losing as much of their water through their leaves. We do have some shade-friendly drought tolerant plants, and we will talk about those together today. And when you think about California, California is this enormous place. We have all kinds of plant communities. We have all kinds of soil and weather. So a plant that would be drought tolerant in, say, Humboldt County is not going to be drought tolerant in San Francisco. And a San Francisco drought tolerant plant may not be drought tolerant down in Los Angeles. And a Los Angeles plant isn't going to be drought tolerant in Death Valley. Each one of those areas has got plants that are adapted to both the high rainfall and the low rainfall and the average rainfall. And the average rainfall in Humboldt County is just a whole lot higher. I planted that maple because I wanted a short maple. There are two native maples to California, the big leaf maple that is native here in San Francisco, and the vine maple, which is native up in Humboldt, and it needs a lot more water. I was surprised. I shouldn't have been. Anyway, so do look at your local native plants for the ones that will be able to handle both the dry years and the wet years when they are established and have grown a root system. Some of our water districts are going to pay you to take out your lawn or your thirsty plants or your paved area and replace it with drought tolerant plants. Water districts that do that are very specific about what they consider to be a drought tolerant plant. There is something called WUCALS. I don't know who named that. Anyway, it's Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. Website run by University of California. It is a really good site. It asks you where you are, and you can choose very low water, medium water, or high water. Those high water plants are things like the willows in the creekside or riparian ecosystems. Medium plants are plants that were near those creeks or definitely understory plants. We have a delicious huckleberry bush that's a blueberry relative. It's a WUCALS medium plant. You don't want to plant that if you really need to use low water. You're looking for the low, very low or low water plants. And your water district will insist that that is what you use when you landscape, which is fine. Those plants are easier anyway. The metropolitan water districts in Southern California, which is the wholesale water district for 19 different retail water districts, has started to recommend not drought tolerant plants, but drought tolerant native plants. They've got a new program called Be Water Wise. They will pay you to replace your turf, and they want you to use WUCALS very low or low native plants. Marin Water's got rebates. Contra Costa County's got a really interesting program with some really pretty pictures on their website. So even if you don't live in Contra Costa County, go take a look at their website and look at pictures of people's front lawns. Well, what was their front lawn? Front areas, front gardens. They're gorgeous. They will let you replace with any WUCALS low or very low, but the ones that seem to survive the best are the native plants. I've been out walking there and it's just, they've got some really nice looking front gardens. As of today, San Francisco Public Utilities Program, which is my water district, it gives green infrastructure grants and urban watershed stewardship grants, but those are pretty much for areas where you're taking out paved areas. The watershed actually does run down into San Mateo County, but it's just for our watershed. They are going to rebate if you do, if you have a water saving, rainwater saving container system, they'll give you a rebate for that. State of California's got urban greening grants. They require WUCALS low or very low. I was just on a presentation with the state of California. They've got additional money for this, additional money for restoration, both at the coast, coastal and waters, but also inland. All kinds of new grants have just come out from the state. And so that's going to be pretty amazing. So far, they've only required WUCALS low and very low. I did ask if they would consider restricting that to local native plants, and Wade Crowfoot said they would, but I don't think he realized that it's not currently a requirement. So please consider doing that. If you're going to spend the state's money, please save water, not just for the climate, but also for biodiversity. So let's talk about how to garden with native plants. Plant during the rainy season. Can't say that enough. If you're an experienced gardener, you are exempt. But the rest of us, the new gardeners and the just not very good at this, or the lazy, I'm also a lazy gardener, we should plant during the rainy season. Just buy yourself, use one of your raincoats and plant during the rainy season. I actually like to plant in the rain. It just means that I have that much less work to do as the plants grow. It really helps to know your soil type and to choose plants that are adapted to your soil. It helps to understand if you've got a sunny or a shady area, and choose plants that are adapted to sun and shade. When we think about what plants look like in nature, sometimes they evolved in shady spaces, sometimes they evolved in very, very sunny spaces. A lot of our grassland plants need full sun. A lot of our pioneer plants, the plants that come after there's been a fire, they need full sun. You will be more successful if you know what your sun and shade are and what your soil are. If you just don't want to have to care, I will actually get to some plants that don't care, I promise. And I find that I am more successful when I plant larger sizes, not 5 or 15 gallon, those are just stupid expensive, but 4-inch pots or 1-gallon pots. So not 2-inch pots, those take way too much work and too much water. And please leave your leaves on the ground. Both feeds the soil and it hides caterpillars from birds that want to eat them when they're in their cocoons. So understanding your soil and your sun and shade and your water conditions and your plant size will really help you. I'm not kidding, plant during the rainy season. Here's a little thing on checking your soil type. Because we've got these 3 different kinds of rock, you can look at the rock and get an idea from the color and the texture what that rocky soil looks like. So your serpentine plants are going to be different from your chert plants, which are different from your sandstone plants. And I'm really sorry about that. The National Park Service at the Golden Gate area has got a fantastic section about data and information sheets about our rocky soils and our other soils. And they've got a great section if your child is into geology or you think your child might like to learn about our local geology. They've got the best information on our national park site. It's fantastic. The way you can go figure out your soil is there are a couple of things you can do. You can go outside, take a spoon, and just dig some of your soil and put it into a pint or quart container and take it with you to a native gardening store and just go, okay, this is my soil. What is it? The other thing you can do is you can look at home. You can take a cup of water with you and a pencil or a screwdriver, something pointy, go out into your backyard, poke in there and see what you've got. If your soil chips off, it's probably rocky and it's serpentine, it's chert, or it's sandstone. If it doesn't chip, but it's clumpy, it might be clay. If it feels grainy, it might be sand. You can pour the water into it. So all of our soils, especially in the dry season, have kind of a skin on them. The soil is trying not to lose water. The soil wants to retain its water too, as do any roots from any plants you've got in that soil. So pouring a little bit of water on there and then waiting and then pouring some more water. Clay, it'll sink in really slowly. Sand, you still have to get through that skin, but once you've done that, it's going to sink in a whole lot faster. And it just feels like soft cake crumbs. It might be loam. We really do have loam here in San Francisco, oddly. All of the English gardening books assume you have loam. English gardening books are pretty to read. They don't apply to us ever, and neither do the East Coast books. Read California gardening books if you're interested in gardening and in learning about someone's gardening experience in California. The rest of those people have wet summers and we just don't. Watering drought tolerant plants. So we've got watering recommendations from a bunch of California Native Plant Society chapters and from the state. California Native Plant Society, Santa Clara Valley, has got free information on their website. They've also got some wonderful videos, and California Native Plant Society State has got wonderful videos as well and wonderful information on their website. Both of them have historically a bunch of Zoom presentations and other video presentations that are on YouTube. Great place. CalScape, which is the California Native Plant Society plant selection website, has also got some information on watering native plants, and then some native nurseries do as well. Las Politas, which is amazing. So plant during the rainy season. I'm not kidding. And water the plant as soon, put water in the hole, wait for it to sink in. Put more water in the hole, wait for it to sink in. You need to get water that in that hole to surround it, because if you are not actually planting in the rain, which I may be one of the few people crazy enough to do, if you're like, no, I'm not planting in the rain, then your soil needs to have water. It needs to have water in it for that plant to survive. And that water is going to be evaporating, put the plant in the hole and water the plant. Then the water will start to evaporate from the soil underneath that you dumped the water into. And then it'll hit that brand new little baby plant and it'll stop and get some water into there. Water for every day for the first 5 days after planting, no matter how tiny or big that plant is. And then if it's a 2-inch pot, you need to water it more often, every other day for the first year until the next rainy season starts. 4-inch pots, 3 to 4 days, 1 gallon pots, 5 to 7 days. I don't plant 5 or 15 gallon pots, but I would think you would also need to do every 5 to 7 days just to make sure that those roots have the opportunity to live. We do have native bulbs. A bulb is like an onion bulb, or more often a pearl onion bulb, like a small bulb. A lot of our bulbs really adapted to our dry summers. And so they've got to have at least 2 months of dry. So if you've got it in a container, you've got it in a planted area, just be sure not to water those. They really, no kidding, need it dry. So when you put native plants in, you just have all this gorgeous wildlife show up. So much color, so many friendly, wonderful things. It's just a wonderful experience to see all the wildlife that enjoys your garden. And look at those chewed leaves. Celebrate those little guys. Chewed leaves means you've got caterpillars. Caterpillars means you've got birds. You've got a functioning ecosystem. Functioning ecosystem is what it's all about. Chewed leaves are what we've got to have. So please leave those leaves on the ground. Birds are going to use their dried flower parts for nest materials. So plant a bunch of things together so that if you've got dried flower parts left over from flowers that were flowering in the winter or the spring and they look dry in the summer, birds are going to use those. So please just consider the Japanese wabi-sabi aesthetic of just, this is beautiful. We have to leave these things in place. The birds need the dried flower parts. They eat native plant seeds. Caterpillars need those leaves on the ground. Our soil needs those leaves on the ground. Our native bees, 70% of them nest in the ground. So honeybees, those are from Europe and Asia. They've got hives. They have really big colonies. Our bumblebees have got maybe 7 or 8 little baby bees associated with them. It's really small. They need to be able to nest in the ground. Sometimes they nest in abandoned, some of them nest in woods, sort of abandoned bird nests, and some of them nest in stems, interestingly. So your native plants are going to feed wildlife at all the plant and wildlife stages, including when the plants go dormant. So plant to feed your ecosystem in every season. All right, we're finally going to talk about the plants. So let me just introduce you to how these plants were chosen, because if we've got 400 plants here that are native to San Francisco, and let's just say 100 of them came from the creek and lake and marsh area, we got another 300 plants. Oh, I'm not talking about 300 plants today. So what I did was I combined whatever the WUCAL system said on very low water use and low water use with CalScape's very low water use and low water use, plus CalScape's very easy plants. And then I asked a bunch of friends, hey, have you been able to kill any of these plants? And if anything was able to be killed, off the list it went. I have actually killed a few of the plants that had all of those combined factors. Yeah, if I've killed it, it's not on the list. So I'm planning to present just the very easiest of plants. There will be some plants that are for sand, wind, and fog. I am taking that information off of the internet. I've asked my friends who grow in those areas, but I have never successfully grown any sand plant because I grow in clay. I have tried to plant sand-friendly plants in clay. They died, so can't recommend that. But there are some easy plants if you are living very close to the coast and you've got dune, what was dune or dune scrub area. If you've got sand and fog and wind, we've got easy plants that love that weather and are adapted to it. And we're going to look at it from a gardener's point of view. We're going to do some icons and guides so that you know what you're looking at. And then we'll look at it from garden uses: ground covers, shorter flowers, grasses, shrubs, vines, trees, container plants, and some plant collection examples. Thank you, Mary Beth, for that idea. So here are some guides when we were looking at those plants. We're going to look at the number of butterfly and moth caterpillar species fed by those plant leaves so that you can have birds in your garden. We're going to look for long blooming plants, something that's blooming at least for 3 months or longer. When I put in a plant in my garden, I want it to bloom and bloom and bloom and bloom. And did I mention bloom? So lots of long blooming plants. I have done an edible native plant presentation for the library before. It's on the San Francisco Public Library's YouTube channel. In that presentation, there are different kinds of parts of edible plants, just like you wouldn't eat a tomato leaf, you only eat a tomato. Same thing with any native plant. There are parts that are edible and parts that are not as edible. In this presentation only, those little cherries, they mean edible. My other presentations, they always mean berries. This presentation, it just means that there is some edible part. If you're interested in edible native plants, please consider seeing either the California Native Plant Society Yerba Buena website, where I've got a plant list for edible plants, as well as a plant list for shade plants, as well as a bunch of other plant lists, and or watch the San Francisco Public Library presentation on edible native plants. But I wanted to make sure that all of you drought tolerant gardeners know that you can still grow an edible garden, even if it's drought tolerant, which is exciting. So let's talk about ground covers. I love ground covers. I have way too many ground covers. I grow 3 of these 4 plants. Red fescue is one of our native grasses that can be mowed. Bunch grasses are really neat. Some of the native bees that we have that nest in the ground specifically like to nest in bunch grasses. Fantastic. You can mow that particular bunch grass. Yerba Buena is just the most fun plant. Our Native Plant Society chapter was named after Yerba Buena because it's delicious and it's shade friendly. And I love eating it. It's in the mint family, so you can eat the leaves and the flowers. And it's delicious, it's shade friendly, it's a fantastic plant. Douglas iris can take a lot of shade, and it comes in a bunch of different colors. The species is purple, but there are a bunch of other colors in the landscape. So if you just love iris, because a lot of us do, they're just beautiful, this is a drought tolerant iris that's going to do beautifully in a shady spot in your garden. Seaside daisy is a wonderful plant. It can handle all kinds of different soils, and it blooms for months. I put in some 1 gallons in January, and they just stopped blooming. They bloomed January to August. It's astonishing. Long bloom, really friendly, can deal with some shade as well as some sun. That's what I needed in that particular space. Fantastic plant. We've got coyote bush, which is a really interesting plant. There's a version that is a ground cover, as well as some versions that are shrubs. Very, very, very drought tolerant. Sagebrush, very drought tolerant, very, very friendly to all kinds of different soils. They both need full sun, as does that golden aster, which is just a gorgeous drought tolerant. All of these need full sun, no kidding, full sun. They want full sun, but they're drought tolerant, they're bulletproof, and they're pretty. So it's wonderful to have in the garden. If you love succulents, we have 3 native succulents, all of which are adapted to rocky soil. They'll also deal with sandy soil. If you've got a container garden, you'll definitely want sand for that, but they do love some rock, and they are important to our ecosystem. We've got the I'm going to get the butterfly on. We have an endangered butterfly that uses the stonecrop as its baby food plant, and that is a long blooming plant. I have personally never grown succulents. They don't like clay soil. The library did have Kip McMichael, who is a California Native Plant Society succulent enthusiast, give a succulent presentation. So if you love succulents, you might want to take a look at that. But we do have 3 native succulents, which are particularly good for our butterflies. So these are all sand plants. I can't grow them and haven't grown them, but I have heard that they are easy ground covers. There's beach primrose and beach knotweed and dune tansy. I know seaside daisies are a little bit of a, usually if it's got beach or dune in the name, in the common name, it means it really likes sand. But our native plant websites like Calscape will help you make sure that, that you look for your soil. I haven't grown these. I hear they're easy and they're definitely pretty. Seaside daisy is a little bit of a misnomer because it will grow on so many different kinds of soil. These are only for sand, wind, and fog, and they love it. So one of the weird things about putting in a new garden is you can put in this little tiny thing that's the size of a banana split, or if it's a 4-inch pot, it's the size of 1 scoop of ice cream. And it just looks really funny because you need to put it 3 feet away from the next plant that it's going to be, because someday it's going to be 3 feet wide. But right now it's the size of a scoop of ice cream. So what I do when it's just this weird little landscape with like weird little bits of salad coming up is I like to spread native annual seeds, because while your perennials, which means that plant stays with you every year, while your perennial is working on its root system, you've got annuals that, boy, they live fast, they die young. They've got 1 year to be on soil, get some rain, and grow and bloom. And that's what California annuals do. They are fine with dry summers. Some of them are even fine in shade. That miner's lettuce does really well in shade. So consider getting some of our California native plant seeds, the annuals, and just scatter those in between those little clumps of salad in your garden, because those will eventually get bigger. And in the meantime, you've got all the annuals out there being super happy. And so these are all pretty short annuals that are going to look great in between your other new baby plants. So let's talk shorter flowers, not quite tall enough to be a shrub. So 2 feet or lower, but taller than a ground cover. Gumweed is gorgeous. It's got a terrible name, and I'm so sorry, but it's so pretty and it's so friendly to butterflies. California fuchsia is amazing. It blooms for months. It is blooming in my garden right now. So it blooms in the summer and the fall when nothing else is blooming. I've got hummingbirds out there using it for food right now. It's such a great plant. It does need full sun. All of these need full sun, but they're pretty and they're happy and they look fantastic and they're great with a bunch of different soil types. Those California poppy seeds, by the way, those are edible. You do want to be careful if you're going to be taking a drug test for a job. California poppy seeds show up just like opium does or heroin. So yeah, make sure you don't eat it for a couple of weeks before, but you can eat California poppy seeds raw, or you can cook them in poppy seed muffins. They're a lot of fun to have. We've got some great shorter flowers. We've got 70 different onions here in California. They are all those little bulbs are about the size of a pearl onion or a little bit smaller, but they're gorgeous and they're entirely edible. The entire onion family, if it's got allium in the name, in the first word in the Latin name, then it means that it's in the onion family. It's entirely edible. So the bulb is edible, the leaves are edible, the flowers are edible, the seeds are edible, and the seeds and the flowers taste like onion and they're delicious. So they're great in salads. They're great on avocado toast. So much fun to have. I cannot make myself eat the bulbs because if you eat the bulb, you don't get the leaves and the flowers and the seeds the next year. So I can't make myself eat the bulbs, but the flowers and the seeds and the leaves are delicious. If you love mint, coyote mint is an extremely minty plant. It does want full sun. All of these want full sun. My coyote mint gets part shade and hates life every year, but it is entirely edible. It's in the mint family. So those flowers are edible, the seeds are edible, and the leaves are edible. All edible raw, although you can also cook with them if you want to use mint in cooking. Phacelia is a fabulous plant. I've got a picture of it there with a butterfly because butterflies also like to nectar on it, but the bees are nuts for it. In May, it is the bees' favorite plants, and I really love planting for bees, so it's a great plant to have. The Phacelia californica is it is the perennial Phacelia. We also have some annual Phacelias. And California aster, another great plant. It doesn't quite meet my 3-month minimum, but I put in some finally this year, and it bloomed for 2 months. Like, really, that's fantastic, and just super bulletproof and fantastic, easy for butterflies and bees and small insects to land on it and get a snack. If you've got more of a moonlight garden where you want to plant a lot of white or light colored flowers, so that when you go, because if you are only going to see your garden at night, you might want lighter colored flowers. So for a moonlight garden, cudweed, which is a much prettier plant than its name, and Pearlia everlasting are beautiful white flowers in the landscape. Milkweed is not native to San Francisco, weirdly. We do have a Western monarch butterfly population, and they all need to eat, the caterpillars all need to eat milkweed leaves as caterpillar food. It's a pretty famous story. They are long blooming plants. You're not supposed to have it within 5 miles of the coast. I grow it anyway because I didn't know that back when I started growing it. If you're going to grow milkweed, please grow some of the California species. Those are available at a lot of different nurseries. You might also consider buying it from seed. I recently found out that the plants are required to have a particular kind of pesticide on them, because the plants could also support the invasive and destructive light brown apple moth caterpillar, as can a whole bunch of other species that all are being sold with pesticide on the leaves. So grow those from seeds. I will say that the weed in milkweed is pretty accurate. It grows great from seed, and a lot of places have seed, and the seeds aren't treated with pesticide. It's a great plant to have in the landscape. It's blooming in my garden right now, and I love plants that bloom late summer, early fall, so that we can continue to feed butterflies and bees and other insects during the dry season. These are gorgeous plants. So bee plant wants a lot of shade. Brodiea can take shade, ethereal spear can take shade. Brodiea and ethereal spear are both bulbs, so great for containers and great for rock gardens. You can just stick them someplace, and they both bloom in May. I think ethereal spear blooms a couple weeks before Brodiea does. Those both have edible flowers. The bulbs would be edible cooked, but don't eat them. Just let the flowers come up every year, and you can eat the flowers, and it's so much fun. Bee plant's fantastic. Tiny little red flowers that the bees just adore, and it can take a lot of shade. So yarrow is one of the easiest plants you can grow. I had a friend look at some yarrow we were growing in a public space, and she said if yarrow weren't native, we would consider it to be a weed. It's one of the few perennials I've ever grown from seed. I got some in a seed mix, and it's all come up, and it is a really happy plant, really easy to grow. Can take a lot of shade, can take a lot of sun. It is one of those plants that if it gets a little bit of water, it'll grow, and then it'll wait. A little bit more water, it'll grow, it'll wait. I've got some that just, it is a bulletproof plant. That plant is just as easy and drought tolerant as it gets. And shorter plants for sand, fog, and wind. Dune bush lupine, again, dune, that means it needs sand, and coast buckwheat. So the lupines are very important plants. Our federally endangered Mission blue butterfly uses our lupine plants for the caterpillars. And so please, if you have sandy soil, please grow some of our lupines. Also on sandy soil is our coast buckwheat and our federally endangered coastal green hair streak butterfly uses the coast buckwheat as a caterpillar plant. So a lot of people, better people than me, like to grow grasses. It's very zen looking. I'm sort of more of a chaos, a lot of flowers. I want to see a lot of bees, or I start to pout. I was told that I had to have a grass in my landscape by my landscape designer. And so I have one grass. And because I have that grass, I have the butterfly associated with it. I get a number skipper every year. So not only will you have the opportunity to grow really bulletproof plants, but they're also going to bring butterflies into your landscape. It's a wonderful thing. And shrubs, back to the flowers. Now, so these two shrubs, if you just do not want to care about sun and shade, you're like, no, I just need something tall. Malvarosa's evergreen, coffeeberry's evergreen. Coffeeberry's got little tiny flowers. The berries are actually a little bit more, you can see those a little bit better, but the bees love the flowers. Those are not edible berries. I remember planting it before I could figure out what was edible. But it is a great evergreen plant, get to 15 feet fairly fast, and you can trim it like a hedge. It's fantastic. Malvarosa, you can trim like a hedge. I have seen it in full sun. I've seen it in full shade. There's a nice big one down at the San Mateo Arboretum. Really nice plant and long blooming. So we've got mugwort, which it's a shorter artemisia. Artemisia is just, we had talked about it earlier with the sagebrush. It's in the sagebrush family. It's a sagebrush cousin. It's supposed to be just, I'm sorry, this one is taller than the other shorter ones. Gets to 8 feet. I went out to shop for the white pitcher sage once, and I brought home the Southern California version instead because that's what they had, and I really wanted this plant. I don't see white pitcher sage enough in the landscape. It's a great plant. It can take a lot of shade, and it's long blooming. I mean long blooming, like 9 months. It's great. And if you've got sand and fog and wind, chaparral, the chaparral currant, the Ribes malvaceum is going to be great. The Ribes sanguineum glutinosum, the pink flowering currant, wants a little bit more water. This one can take a lot less, at least that's what I hear. I haven't grown it. And the ocean spray, sand, fog, and wind. It's got a slight scent. Very, very showy flowers. The currants have showy flowers in the winter, and the ocean spray's got showy flowers as well. So lots of fun to have in the landscape. That currant is a really important plant to have. It blooms in the winter. So it blooms between December and February when very, very few other things are blooming. And again, we're going to think like a plant. It's because in the wintertime, you don't really know how much water you're going to get. And so you don't know if you want to spend all of your resources working on your root system or if you want to flower. So the few plants that we have that flower in the winter are really important for the wildlife that likes to stay in our landscape year round, like those hummingbirds. And those currants are edible, so lots of fun. Long blooming, great for wildlife. Edible for us, the berries are, it's a great plant. These are plants that need full sun. Woolly sunflowers, just very, very bright. It's shallow flowers, great for lots of insects. Yellow bush lupine. This is actually good on clay as well as on sand. So I've seen it in my neighborhood. Supports over 70 different butterflies and moths. Again, some of those are endangered butterflies, very long blooming, very drought tolerant. Only going to talk about 2 plants that are not local to San Francisco. One was the milkweed and the other one is the bush mallow. I grow it because it blooms it's been a terrible, terrible rain year, like the one we just had, it blooms for 3 months. If it gets a really good rain year, where we got 20, 24 inches of rain, it'll bloom for 5 months. So it's a great plant to have in a landscape. It just has a few butterflies that feed on the leaves, but those are the American lady butterflies, and they look, actually, I think it's an American lady that's on that woolly sunflower. So really bright orange, beautiful to have in the landscape. And those bright pink, those pink flowers, it just blooms for months. So if you think you can't grow anything, you can grow a bushmallow. Oh, and it wants to be 16 feet. It's not going to, you can cut it back, it'll grow. You can cut it back, it'll grow. So make sure to put it in a space where it can get to be as big as it wants to be. I made that mistake. And that picture is my mother-in-law's, because I made that mistake twice. Anyway, she likes to cut that thing back. It still grows. These are another couple of those gray plants, great in the landscape, really good about all kinds of sand and fog and wind. For the California sagebrush is good on all kinds of soil. It does want full sun. Coyote bush blooms late summer, early fall, so it's blooming right now. Small yellow flowers, shallow, really good for insects. There is both the ground cover version and the shrub version. Sagebrush, we saw the ground cover version earlier. This is the shrub version. And there's a dune sagebrush that I hear actually does well in something other than dunes, but I haven't seen it myself, and I haven't tried to grow it myself, but I want to. But again, it says dunes, so it's going to be great for sand. All of these need full sun in a no kidding need full sun kind of way. Let's look at some of our vines. So if you've got a trellis or a fence and you want this thing covered, most of our vines are drought tolerant. We've got a couple that aren't, but we've got a beautiful native pea, not edible, but it's really pretty and the flowers are really attractive. They're showy, great for wildlife. We've got native clematis. Only one of them is, we've got two actually. One of them is much more drought tolerant than the other. So be sure to get the chaparral clematis. It's more drought tolerant than our other one. And we've got that beautiful pink flowering honeysuckle and Pacific morning glory. All of those calistigias, if you think you can grow nothing, if you need to cover a large space quickly, that plant will do really well. I do not grow it here because it grows so big so fast, but I did grow it in Los Angeles and it covered everything I own. The morning glory that's native down in LA. It's a very enthusiastic plant. And we do have some drought tolerant trees. Our local oak, there are oaks all kinds across California. Each one of them is adapted to different kinds of soil. All of them want full sun. They are all the keystone species for their ecosystem. The Northern California oak woodland, the Southern California oak woodland, we've got all kinds of different oaks. So if you are in even San Mateo County, if you're in the Peninsula or East Bay or North Bay, you've got more oak choices than we do in San Francisco. In San Francisco, we just have the coast live oak and it gets to 70 feet. It's a big boy. And it wants to grow from an acorn. Acorns are available in October. So if you want to grow an oak, consider just buying, just go get an acorn off a tree. If you really feel you need to buy it from a nursery, buy the smallest one you can get. Dig a very deep hole, because the first thing that acorn does is it creates a taproot, and that taproot is going to be part of a very, very large root system that will help hold your hill and help feed the rest of your ecosystem when it gets big enough. It's going to grow, it actually grows fairly quickly because it's very enthusiastic. Please water it. In nature, they were able to get access to a lot more water in the ground than they are now. So do please water that, but it is a very bulletproof drought tolerant plant once it just gets past its acorn babyhood. Toyon is a lot of fun. It would prefer full sun. The oak wants full sun. The toyon wants full sun. It can deal with a little bit of shade. It is evergreen, very showy red berries in the wintertime. The story is that Hollywood was named after this plant because people were using this to have sort of a holly equivalent at Christmas time. It does have a range all the way down to Southern California, as does that coast live oak. The coast silk tassel tree is gorgeous. It only wants to grow in sand and fog and wind. It looks like a Christmas tree got into that plate of cookies that you left for Santa. So it's kind of wide at the bottom. You could trim it to look like a lollipop tree if you wanted to, but please don't. Please leave those leaves and those gorgeous tassels to be all the way down to the ground, because you can plant all of the other sand plants behind it and it will help be a windbreak. So it's a wonderful plant, a wonderful windbreak. You've got to plant it within a mile of the coast. It's got to have fog and wind or it's not happy. Container gardening. So a lot of us garden in containers. And so here are some gorgeous sun-friendly plants. The lupines that we talked about earlier, there are a variety of these gorgeous, colorful lupines that are annuals. So they're going to have, annuals have very short root systems. They don't want to spend their resources on their root systems. They want to live fast, die young. They want to take whatever weather they got and just bloom. And so very shallow root systems means they're great in containers. That chia sage is actually not local here. This is the third plant I have that's not local. It's local a little south of here, but if what you've got is a container garden and you want to be able to grow a sage, this is the sage you can grow, and entirely edible, the flowers, the leaves, the seeds. We talked about the onion earlier, so fun to grow in containers. Goldfields, tidy tips, we talked about them earlier, fun to grow in containers. Dotseed plantain. So it's not a very showy plant. It's a grassland plant. It is the only caterpillar plant for the federally endangered bay checker spot butterflies. So if you've got a little bit of a grassland, if you've got full sun and you've got room for just a little bit of a plant that it's not too showy, but it's real important, please consider putting that in your container garden or in your grassland garden. We do have shade plants. We really do. We do have shade plants that do well in containers. We talked about the iris and the ethereal spear and the miner's lettuce and the brodiea. We've got another couple. We've got farewell to spring, which depending on how much water it gets, can get anywhere from pretty short to 3 feet tall if you're irrigating it. It is in one of our parks this year that is getting some irrigation because it's got new plants in it, and we have 3 feet tall. Farewell to spring. It'll bloom all summer if it gets water. It'll just bloom for a little while in the summer if it doesn't. Either way, easy plant. Brodiea we talked about earlier, and we talked about Phacelia earlier. We talked about the Phacelia californica as a perennial plant that wants full sun. This Great Valley Phacelia, for some reason, can handle some shade. And it's an annual, so it's great for your shady containers, really pretty color. So let's talk about some plant collections. Any shade, any soil, try Seaside Daisy because it's going to start with that winter bloom and then bloom all the way to August. Spring bloom from Ethereal Spear. You can get the yarrow that blooms in the summer. Just a fantastic set of plants, and they look great together. You could try putting the Malvarosa with the Doug Iris and the Farewell to Spring. Something that I have finally gotten better at is putting my taller plants in the back. So Malvarosa in the back with Douglas Iris in front of it and Farewell to Spring around it, because you will get the Malvarosa growing and being tall, and the Douglas Iris and the Farewell to Spring giving you a ton of color in the spring and summer. For those of you who are experienced native plant people, and if you are experienced native plant people and I have missed any of your favorite bulletproof plants, please put that in the Q&A so that we can all see your recommendations. These are slow growing. So if you're a brand new gardener, maybe don't try these the first year, try them the second year. They're slow growing. I want to make sure that you get some good feedback from your garden saying, yes, yes, plant more of me, plant more of my friends, plant more of my plant community. Woohoo, you're great. I want your plants to tell you that. These plants are a little slower growing, but they're fantastic in the garden and they will be bulletproof once they get through their first summer. Any of our manzanitas and our California lilacs. The other thing about them is that they're all very, very soil specific. So they want sand, nothing but sand, clay, nothing but clay, a particular kind of rock and nothing but that rock. So that's true of our manzanitas and of our California lilacs that also want full sun in a no kidding want full sun kind of way. If you're fairly new to California, those manzanitas have got that beautiful twisting red limbs and the peeling bark. It's absolutely gorgeous. And the California lilac has got those eye-poppingly beautiful blue flowers. So pretty. Each one of these plants, both the manzanitas and the lilacs, are available as shrubs, as ground covers, and as tree forms. So be sure to know what kind of size and space you've got before you buy them, because regardless of which one you get, they will be gorgeous. So the water use classification of landscape systems and I almost always agree, except on these three plants. These three plants are called Wucal's mediums. So if you decide to put them in your garden, your water district is not going to pay you back for those. But I have found them to be drought tolerant in my garden. There are a couple of different kinds of strawberries which can take quite a bit of shade. I grow the Fragaria vesca because that does better on clay. The Chilensis is the one, it's the beach strawberry. It does better on sand. And some of the beach strawberry genetics here are actually in our supermarket strawberries. These are much smaller strawberries than a supermarket strawberry. And if you're thinking to yourself, oh no, I've grown strawberries before and they require a lot of water, our native strawberries don't. Those are smaller fruit, and so they don't need as much water. Checker bloom is a really interesting plant. It's got gorgeous pink. So if you love pink flowers in your garden, that's fantastic. I don't know why it's Wucal's medium. I've got it as a ground cover. It is summer deciduous. If it doesn't get enough water during the winter, the leaves dry up, but the root system is fine below. And as soon as the rains start again, it'll put out new fresh green leaves, and then you'll get pink flowers in the spring. It's just gorgeous. Blue elderberry is, to me, a bulletproof plant. I've got one in my neighbor's garden and one in a public garden. It does full sun to full shade. It does want to get to be 30 feet. Mary Beth and I both have this plant. Mine is 12 years old and it's 22 feet tall and it's not stopped growing. It's got showy white flowers, very shallow flowers, so great for all kinds of insects, delicious edible berries. And so it's like a bird feeder. It's got the leaves feeding insects that the birds can eat. It's got the flowers feeding insects that the birds can eat. And then the birds like the berries. Great, great plant. It does want to be 30 feet. It doesn't want to be cut back. More plant collections. And this is a plant collection for sand and fog. It's the beach primrose, the dune bush lupine, and the California poppy. And look at those colors together. It's spectacular. You're not going to find an English garden that's going to look this gorgeous. This is what native plants do. They just look pretty together. Oh, and those poppies are, by the way, any soil. So you're sitting through this and you're like, no, I need a garden I can put in, water once, walk away, and never, ever think about it. It needs to be able to take care of itself. So other than weeds, because in urban and suburban areas, we do have a lot of weeds, these plants do well with no assistance. The poppies, the miner's lettuce, ethereal spear, the farewell to spring, yarrow, and the onion. If you think you can plant nothing, if you have no time to spend on it, all of these things you can buy the seeds and the bulbs and those yarrow seeds on the internet. You can just have the internet send you the seeds and the bulbs, and you don't even have to go to a nursery. So this is the easiest set of plants I know. Again, experienced gardeners who are online, add your favorite easy plants. So let's look at it from the point of a buffet, because as you can tell, I am obsessed with food. So we're going to talk about edible native plant buffets for people, for adult butterflies, because all of our native plants are going to feed our butterfly caterpillars. We'll talk about hummingbirds and bee buffets. Look at all the different plants you can grow that are edible. Go see my edible presentation for more information. And all of the adult butterflies, they tend to like to land on something flattish. I don't know if that just gives them more opportunity to show their wings or what, but that's what they tend to like to do. Hummingbirds are what's called a generalist feeder. Caterpillars, very specific feeders, but hummingbirds are generalist feeders. Humans are generalist feeders. So you could have, and in fact, you probably do have non-native plants, introduced plants that are in your landscape that are feeding your hummingbirds. But the nice thing about growing hummingbird plants with native plants is that it's not only feeding your hummingbird, it will also feed your caterpillars. And we've got those great later season blooming plants like the California fuchsia that the hummingbirds absolutely adore. And our bees. Our bees help pollinate our fruits and vegetables and our gardens. And so when we want to really help our ecosystem, if you could be okay with planting with bees, that would be wonderful. Bees are my favorite. And there are specialist bees that really depend on our native plant pollen for their baby bees. The adult bees can eat pollen and nectar from anywhere, but they really do love the native plants and they need the native plant pollen for those babies. So let's talk about resources. Plant lists, plant selection tools, sources for plants, bloom periods, and using iNaturalist to explore and identify local plants and wildlife. So here at the California Native Plant Society, Yerba Buena Chapter, so our local chapter, it's San Francisco plus the northern part of San Mateo County, we have a bunch of plant lists. We've got edible plants and butterflies and hummingbirds and bees and long blooming and shade and color and plant communities and sidewalks and containers and landscape design softscape, which is a fancy landscaper phrase for you can tell the ground covers from the shrubs, from the trees. So pretty helpful. We just redid the butterfly handout to include more butterfly information. It's all free. You can print out a plant list of anything you care about and take it with you to a native nursery and go, okay, this is my stuff. Help me with butterflies or help me with edibles. California Native Plant Society at the state level has got a plant selection tool we call CalScape. It does have a 10-mile radius. So remember, we're 7 miles by 7 miles with 6 different kinds of soil. It will tell you what the soil is, but it won't select for you. It doesn't let you do that. Not yet, anyway. We've given them feedback. And it'll help you with ground covers. It will help you with butterflies. The butterfly information is fantastic to be able to go back and forth. If you want that gorgeous coastal green hair-streaked butterfly, it will tell you what the buckwheat is and the deerweed is that feed it. It will also tell you for any particular plant that you're interested in, what native plant nursery or nurseries carry that, and a map of where those nurseries are located. Free tool, lots of fun to use. CalFlora is another great tool. Both CalScape and CalFlora can show you what the range is for a plant. So again, as we think about planting for climate change, we want to plant what's local and native here in San Francisco. But if it's got a range that takes us down to Los Angeles or San Diego, that's good. It means it can handle a lot less rain. I happen to like CalFlora's bloom period tool. It's just very helpful. I love iNaturalist. It is a fantastic free application, both a web-based version and a mobile version. You can go find the butterflies that are near you. Or if you want to go take a look at what that oak tree looks like or a mature toyon, you can go find out what those plants look like and go see them in our parks and other landscapes. And this way you can find out what it is that you like. If you look at it and you go, yeah, that looked nice online, but I think I really want to see this in real life, that'll take you. iNaturalist is hugely helpful. This is part of an ongoing gardening series with the San Francisco Public Library. And the next presentation will be Just Butterflies on Saturday, January 29th, 2022. Thank you so much to all of the people naturalists whose photos I used, and all of the professional organizations whose photos and data I used. So much thanks to San Francisco Estuary Institute for both their Making Nature City project and their Hidden Nature project, and to Tim Wyatt in that fantastic butterfly cartoon. Thank you to all the people who have reviewed my presentations. We are the California Native Plant Society. We have free lectures and free hikes, and we do restoration and we do advocacy, and all of this is free. And we want to join you in planting native plants to feed our families and our ecosystem with respect to California's limited water. So thank you for planting native plants. Let's take some questions.
Susan, we have 2 people that have their hand raised, 3 now, and there's, the questions in the Q&A, which have been being answered rapidly, which is great. So if our 3 folks that have their hand raised would like to speak, Nikki, you have, and actually really, it's really best just to put your questions in the Q&A, the hand raising, not the best way, but we will see. Nikki. Okay, Nikki has left. Edgar, would you like to speak? I will allow you to talk.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool, sorry, I'm on my bicycle right now, but my question was in regards to potted plants, not necessarily container, but like, I don't know, maybe at most 5 gallons. I live in an apartment with only concrete, so just curious if I'm dooming my native plants by keeping them in pots only. I have a California bay right now, which I'm trying to grow.
Oh, dude. So that bay tree wants to be much bigger. You're right, it really does want to be big. Let's get back to containers. So you're not doing it, but you might want to find a public space where you could plant that. California bays are wonderful. I don't have it in this presentation because I'm not really sure how drought tolerant it is. Those leaves are delicious. I had a drink at some fancy place that was orange juice, cranberry juice, and they took a California bay leaf and they crushed it. And so it adds these green floral flavors, and I absolutely adore it. So that's why I recommend for containers that you use bulbs, annuals, rhizomes. Those are just easier. We do have a container plant list on the website, on our California Native Plant Society Yerba Buena website. And I welcome you to go look at that. But if you want to move your bay tree to a public site, I will say that Department of Public Works here in San Francisco does not care if you plant in their green spaces, as long as you don't plant anything invasive. So you could consider in the rainy season moving your bay tree there. On the other hand, you can just keep it on your porch for as long as you want to. But by containers, I meant pots, window boxes, any container. It can be a takeout container with holes in the bottom. Does that answer your question?
We're going to say yes.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you a question from our YouTube viewer. Do the vines need a lot of sun? How are they in the wind?
So all of the vines, all of these vines need sun. We do have one vine that does not need sun. In fact, it does not want sun, and it will, in fact, get cranky if it gets sun. And that is the California Dutchman's pipe vine. It is not on this list. I can't remember if it's because it's WUCAL's medium or if it just genuinely needs a lot of water that first couple of years. It's drought tolerant once it's established, but it does need a lot of water. It is a plant that goes back and forth between the riparian area and being it's understory in the riparian creekside area and it's understory in the oak woodland. I have got two and just put some in some public spaces this year. It's got to have, so if you're looking for a shade friendly vine, it's Dutchman's pipevine, and it'll do fine on sand as well as on clay. All of these are going to need support. They need a trellis, they need a tree to grow up. So in terms of wind, they want something to hold on to. They don't have suckers like ivy, so they genuinely need something they can wrap around. They're not going to kill anything that they wrap around because that would not have worked for them as they evolved, but they're not going to be as great in wind. They will be fine. These four are fine in sun, and Dutchman's pipevine is fine in shade. Anything else from you two?
Nope, I think we should move to the Q&A function because there's about 21, they're growing, 21 and growing.
Okay.
So let's see what we can get to there. We know we not maybe get to all of the questions, but we can always refer our friends to the California Native Plant Society website.
We can. So definitely please check out the California Native Plant Society website and the CalScape website. So let's see, let's start at the beginning. So Sue, you're interested in plants that do well in the foggy Richmond district. So everything I talked about here that does well in sand and fog is going to do beautifully in the Richmond district. They are evolved for that. We also have both on the California Native Plant Society Yerba Buena website, we have got a biodiversity resources page. Let's see, I'll show you this one. Hopefully you can see that. And this has got all of those lists, including the plant communities list. So if you are in the Richmond, look at the dune list and the dune scrub list. And those are what you're going to find that does well in fog and sand. Someone's asking about native trees that we can plant on our street through Friends of the Urban Forest. I believe Fuff is actually on the line here. I saw Fuff put in a question. So yes, all of these trees do well. It's going to be a little easier to do a toy on than a, where are my trees? So as far as I'm concerned, all of them do well as street trees, and you can use iNaturalist to go take a look at that combination of what are our native trees and what does well on the street. San Francisco Department of Environment has an approved San Francisco street tree list, and take a look at that. It's got 12 different native plants on it, 10 in a native plant section. For some reason, the oak and the California lilac, which comes in a tree version, are both off in a different section, but we do have 12 that are approved. They all do great. It's really a question of what your soil and exposure is and how big it gets. That coast live oak wants to get 70 feet by 70 feet, possibly not going to be right for your area. The toyon is a lot more compact and easier to cut back. Coffeeberry can be trimmed like a tree. Blue elderberry is basically a tree. It's a bush. It grows fast like a shrub, but you trim it like a tree and it's great. So see if those work for you. Jennifer's got the same question. Yes. So Jennifer, the other thing that you can do is go take a look on iNaturalist and see what grows in your area that is also a native plant. Fuff keeps raising their hand. Can we go ahead and get Fuff on the line? Because Fuff is Friends of the Urban Forest. They are the group that plants most of San Francisco's street trees. Anissa?
Yep. Okay. Fuff, you may now unmute and talk.
Fuff, are you there? Okay, I'm going to keep talking. Fuff, when you get a chance, unmute yourself, and we'll stop and we will transfer to you because Fuff knows more about planting sidewalk trees in the city than anyone else. We've got someone saying that they live on the coast in El Granada between Pacifica and Half Moon Bay. Is this information transferable? Yes, absolutely. So the best place to get information about what is specific to you is CalScape, because to make it into this presentation, everything had to have sort of a north-south range that was pretty big. Anything that I'm talking about here is going to be fine for you on the coast. Do check your soil. You may be sandy, windy, foggy, and in which case stick to those plants. We have so few native plants that are there in our sandy, windy, foggy areas. That's why so many of the butterflies that are native to that area are endangered. So it makes a big difference if you plant lupines and buckwheats and deerweed, and those are the plants that are going to support so many of our beautiful coastal butterflies. Laura's talking about nasturtiums. Please don't plant those. Please pull them. When you see them, pull them, take them home, wash them and eat them. They are completely edible, but fennel is edible too. Please don't grow an invasive plant, no matter how pretty it is. I've got a ton of colorful plants that will do fine in the outer Richmond. Please, please don't grow an invasive. So Meg, oh, really good question about the buffets. No, Meg, that's such a good question. These aren't the months to when to plant it. Always plant in the rainy season. These are the plants when you can eat it. These are the months when you can eat it. So the sage, the Yerba Buena, the miner's lettuce really just grows during the rainy season. Yerba Buena and sage have got leaves that are available year round. And so that's why that's something that you could eat at that time. So that's either when something is edible or when it's blooming. Please always plant in the rainy season. Rita, you got a question about a good place to find a professional gardener to help you. I don't know where you are located, but we're very lucky that, where did I put this? Oh no, I moved it. Sorry, there it is. So professionals. California Native Plant Society, the Santa Clara Valley chapter, has got a whole section on their website about native plant professionals. We haven't done that yet with our chapter, Yerba Buena, so we know we need to. But so if you don't live in sort of the Santa Clara Valley Peninsula area, you might want to just reach out to your California Native Plant Society chapter and send them an email and say, hey, this is the information that I'm looking for. Bill, what are the spring and summer plants in the combo with the seaside daisy? So pretty. Seaside daisy, so pretty. Where did it go? Here it is. It's ethereal spear. You could also substitute the Brodiea if you've just got a very small space. Seaside daisy is a very compact plant. It's 2 or 3 feet wide, and that's about it. Yarrow is really compact. And the ethereal spear and the Brodiea are just, they're bulbs with short little flowers. So if you've got a tiny garden and you just want a lot of color for a long time, this is just a great combination. Laura, you've got a question about a landscape gardener. I refer you to the California Native Plant Society, Santa Clara Valley, Find a Professional section. Oh, Kathleen, what's the best variety of ceanothus for fog and wind and sand? If we have a fog, wind, and sand gardener out there, that would be great. I believe Thrissophlorus, which is the native one to San Francisco, can deal with fog, wind, and sand. But definitely check CalScape because I plant on clay. Garden designers for California native drought tolerant plants. Yes, please see the California Native Plant Society, Santa Clara Valley, find a native professional. They've got wonderful gardeners, garden designers. Francis, do we have resources to suggest people be able to come and give your mother advice on her garden? Yes, please come see the California Native Plant Society, Santa Clara Valley, find your professional section. Martha, questions about planting under a native live oak, dry shade, needs to be deer resistant, something low that's not a shrub. Oh, Mary Beth is wonderful. Also, Las Politas Nursery that I referred to, they have got a whole section on what to plant underneath an oak. Let's see. Oh, we're hearing that FUF only does underserved neighborhoods now. Thank you for reminding me. Somebody just told me that. Yeah. Unfortunately, all of our neighborhoods are underserved for insects. Susan, can coffeeberry, elderberry, or toyon be hard pruned for a small yard? Yes, coffeeberry and toyon can. Elderberry will laugh at you. It'll be fine. It'll be hard pruned for a few months. And then once the rains start again, it will get big. But coffeeberry and toyon can be hard pruned. And there are some manzanitas and some ceanothus, some California lilacs that can be hard pruned as well. I did a presentation for the library called Shrubberies, and that's got a whole section on which plants you can prune into a hedge, and that means that you can hard prune it. So I would go take a look at that if you don't mind. And your Western redbud is slow growing. How to help it? Western redbud is not native to San Francisco. It's native to north of here, and it wants a little bit more water. It is a beautiful plant, but it is very slow growing. Because we just had a terrible rain year, if you have a native plant that just isn't, you've put it in, but it isn't doing very well, it's because we had a terrible rain year. It would appreciate some more water right now. Once a week, water it once a week until the rains start, and that'll help it. Can I show the slide with the sun? Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, all of these. I think this is any shade, any soil. This is it. Yep, rose, nasturtium, it's invasive, please remove it. Okay, please remove it, wash it and eat it, but please remove it, it is invasive. The California Invasive Plant Council has got more information on invasive plants, but nasturtium is absolutely positively invasive. Please don't grow it. In fact, if you see it, the city isn't going to use Roundup on it. The only plant that the city of San Francisco is authorized to use Roundup on is the Himalayan blackberry. And all of the other plants do not have pesticide on them. So you can go pick nasturtium out of any green space you see that isn't privately owned. But if it's a public green space, go pick some nasturtiums. You're helping remove invasive plants. Take that home and wash it and have it in salad. It is delicious. What should you plant under a bay laurel? Interesting, my bay laurel doesn't lose its leaves. Oh, okay, I don't have one, but I've got a public space that does. It doesn't usually lose its leaves. It could be that it's not getting enough water. You can plant anything in the oak woodland will be fine. So you can plant seaside daisy, you can plant yarrow. Go take a look at the biodiversity resources page and pull the oak woodland plant list, and all of those things do well. Huckleberry would also do well. It wants a little bit more water. Thimbleberry does well, wants a little bit more water to fruit, but it's going to be fine. When you save the transcript, it's only the Q&A. Paula has got a question about saving the transcript. Anissa, maybe you could help us understand what to do.
I'll answer her in text.
Okay, that sounds great. Justine, you're planting in a public open space. Yes. So my garden is full. I mean, at this point, all I can do is add the occasional bulb. So I'm planting in public open spaces too. And that is what this presentation was for experienced gardeners who need to plant in a public open space that doesn't necessarily have irrigation. I cannot believe how very happy yarrow is. So yarrow, miner's lettuce, California poppies, that's what I would do in a public open space. In fact, that is what I'm doing in public open spaces. I am hauling water to a public open space where I've got seaside daisy, but the yarrow is just, it's so bulletproof. Meg wants to know something drought tolerant that would work well under a redwood tree. So my recommendation for that is to go to both Calscape and Las Politas and look at the redwood ecosystem. And I'm assuming you're talking coast redwood. The coast redwood ecosystem is completely different than the inland ecosystem. Either way, choose the redwood ecosystem. Calscape will have companion plants for redwoods. Las Politas has got an entire plant list for both of those redwood ecosystems. Go find those plants and double check them with that water use classification of landscape systems, the WCALs, or you can check it on Calscape. It'll tell you if it's low or very low water use. And that's what you plant underneath the redwood. Redwoods, by the way, they are having some drought issues. So your redwood is going to maybe need some water. I hear that water spritzers, sort of mist on it, will help keep your redwoods alive. If your coast redwood, even if your coast redwood is on the coast, it may not have gotten enough water this year. Rose, are there some yarrow that are native and some that are hybrids that don't do as well? Oh, Mary Beth is answering you. And yes, that's true. Although I find that all the hybrids of our yarrow, the Achelea millefolium, seem to be doing fine in gardens. It's the European yarrows that don't seem to do as well. And for some reason, Sloat is carrying an Egyptian yarrow. Yeah, don't plant that. And Francis, you want a picture of my garden? Yay, thank you. Where do I have it? I've got a few pictures of my garden. Oh, that's my garden. And that books, yay. And that's also my garden. That's the damp section of my garden. Weirdly, there's a underground stream, so there's a corner of my garden that's damp. And yeah, let's see, native drought landscape designers for San Francisco, a lot of them are on that California Native Plant Society, Santa Clara Valley list. Alexandra Harker donated some design services for the Potrero Eco Patch, and that thing is gorgeous, and that is on serpentine, so she's really good. The red flowers by the benches. So that's not a flower, that is a grape. So we don't have native grapes to San Francisco, but we do to the rest of California. And that particular native grape is called Rogers Red. And it is, it's beyond beautiful. It's gorgeous. It is a 40-foot plant and it wants to be 40 feet every year. So I wouldn't put in a grapevine unless you really want a ton of compost or you have a 40-foot chain link fence that you want to have covered every year. Oh yes, I will show you the rainy season. So the rainy season has also become more compressed just to make things more terrifying. The rainy season used to start in September, and then it used to start in October, and then it used to start in November. And yay, climate change. Now it starts in December. So that's our rainy season. It's depressing. Really, new gardeners, just plant in the rainy season. What do I do for water? Ooh, I'm so glad you asked. Yes, converting washing machines to gray water, absolutely. Strongly recommend that you go to California Native Plant Society's, the state's YouTube channel. They just did a presentation on drought tolerance. It is completely different than what I just talked about. And there is a third of it that talks about converting to gray water. There are a couple of good books on this, Art Ludwig and I think it's Brad Lancaster. I'm probably getting that wrong. I know it's not Burt Lancaster. That's that's the actor. But I would recommend going to California Native Plant Society State's YouTube channel And they will give you all that information. It's so great. I use cooking water that isn't pasta water to do a lot of my irrigation. And then I've got cisterns as well. It's fantastic. Oh, Nature in the City has services like garden maintenance. You're right. Thank you for reminding me. Nature in the City's got garden maintenance and they've got garden designers. And let's see. Meg likes the idea of leaving leaves on the ground. You're concerned about the fire hazard and you live in Oakland on flatlands. So what our fire departments are asking us to do is have defensible space around our areas. And so that would be permeable landscaping, something that you keep watered, something that you're going to use gray water on. You're right. You don't want to have dead leaves on the ground right next to your house. I do, but you don't want to. So if you've got a little bit more space, at least 5 or 6 feet away from the walls of your house is where you can start leaving the dead leaves on the ground. Thank you for mentioning that. Appreciate that. Let's see. Is that all the Q&A? Did we get them all? Let's do that.
I have one more in YouTube.
Sure.
Let's see. What plants are recommended for east side of Twin Peaks where it's foggy and windy, no sun? Apartment deck.
Yes. Okay. Congratulations. That would be difficult for anything other than a native plant. And I'm strongly recommending, if you are going to do containers, that you do. The thing about fog and wind is that shorter is better. Where are my container plants? So Douglas iris is going to be great. Miner's lettuce is going to be amazing. Farewell to spring will be fine. It's going to do fine in the wind. Those bulbs, the protea, the ethereal spear, they're going to be fine in fog and wind. And that particular Phacelia. So this is going to give you a lot of color. It'll be fine in fog and wind. And you could add yarrow to that. And they will be great in containers. What else do we have? Oh, thank you for putting that neighborhood gardening in a drought. It's in the chat as a resource.
Also
So,
in links. And
pardon?
just a reminder, we'll remind folks, here it comes again. Lots and lots of what Susan has said is here in this one document for your easy to go to location, as well as the YouTube version of this recording. You'll all be getting an email that has this same links. And yeah, it's a lot of resources. And of course, Susan's massive resource list is also included in here. And yeah, you can watch all of these, this one and all of the past CNPS events on our YouTube channel.
Let's see. Lisa's got a question about what to plant under Monterey cypress. Again, I do that combination of Las Bolitas plus Cowscape. Go find the Monterey cypress plant community and it will tell you what will live underneath it. I have not personally planted underneath Monterey cypress. Monterey cypress is not native to San Francisco. It was planted here. They were planted here back in the 1880s and they are failing now. So that's not much fun. But if you have a healthier Monterey cypress, that will be, you'll be able to find that in some combination of Las Bolitas and Cowscape. The other thing you can do, because Monterey cypress is native to Monterey, go to Cowscape, just pretend you live in Monterey. It's not like you get it, there's a test. And most of the things that will come up from Monterey are going to live underneath that cypress. But it's a really good question. We do have a lot of those in the city.
I see, Paula, I just want to confirm that I will send you an email of the transcript. I got you. It's going to do it right now, or right as soon as this ends. Thank you, Paula.
Let's see. Are native plants wild and not meant to be put in a pot? So native plants in wild spaces like our national parks are wild. But to be able to bring our insects back, for instance, I live east of Van Ness in San Francisco, and all of that burned in the 1906 earthquake and fire, all of it. So everything east of Van Ness Street has been planted. So nothing is wild east of Van Ness, just nothing, even the native plants. What's important that we learned from San Francisco Estuary Institute is that we plant our natives to bring back our insects and our wildlife. So it doesn't have to be wild to be native, to be useful to our ecosystem. We can, and in fact, we need to replace all that ivy, all those camellias, all those nasturtiums with native plants so that we can feed our insects and our wildlife. And yes, we do have some that are fine in a pot. If you think like a plant, if what you have are tiny little root systems because you're an annual, or a bulb or a rhizome because you're an iris or an onion, you're going to be fine in a pot. They will be fine. They are not going in a pot or a container or a window box. You're not going to have the advantage of a native plant that would be in the rest of an ecosystem with, say, a big oak tree or a bay leaf tree or one of our willows. So you would have to water them a little bit more often, but you will still have advantages to your ecosystem because you're feeding insects and bees and birds. Let's see. Has Fuff been able to talk? I see that you made them.
No, I asked them several times. I think we should have Fuff out. That sounds like a great program.
It would be
I'm
a
like,
great program.
Who's Fuff? That's a fun name, but it's not their name.
Friends of the Urban Forest.
I got that finally. Yes, I think we may have, with the amazing thanks and help of Mary Beth, we have answered 85 questions. So
That is amazing.
I think we did really well, friends. And for those who just emailed or texted and chatted, I'm going to save the transcript right now. Saved. And I think we'll call it. How about that, Susan? Are we good?
That's wonderful.
And Susan mentioned she will be back in January 29th, all about butterflies. Mary Beth, thank you so much for all your amazing behind the scenes help. And Fuff, I see you say there you can't unmute. You should connect with me. I'd love to have a program with you. Maybe Susan can do that, connect us if you know somebody. Otherwise, my email will be in the follow-up email you all get. Fuff, let's do a program. Susan, we'll see you soon. Mary Beth, big thank you to you and library community. Have a good one.
Thanks everyone for planting natives.
Yay.